Um,
Okay, now you can start. Thank you.
well, thank you very much for inviting me to be a guest speaker today at PAVE. I feel very privileged, and I have met some of you before, but not in this capacity. But I would like to start by with an acknowledgement to country. So we will begin today by acknowledging the traditional custodians of the land on which we gather. We pay our respects to elders past, present, and emerging, and we thank them for being the successful custodians of this great southern land we call Australia. Dharawal country is the country on which I sit today, and Warrenor River runs through Dharawal country and means river of black rock. Respecting land and culture acknowledges all of the waterways, the air, the plants, and the animals. My name is Marelle Burnum, and I am the mother of an Indigenous son. My first husband was Burnum, and Burnum was an activist, an author, and an Indigenous elder. And with Burnum, he was infamous by going to England in 1988 and claiming England back on the White Cliffs of Dover. Now, this was a theatrical stunt that he peacefully drew attention to, and the effects that the English possession had had on his people. And it was a very peaceful, because I know PAVE is concerned with peace, and it was a very peaceful theatrical stunt that drew attention to the fact of what had happened to First Nation people when the English did come. And one of the funny things that happened was that after he had claimed or possessed England in this satirical claim, the interviewer said to him, well, what are you going to do with England now that you have claimed England? And he said, excuse the expression, but it's too bloody cold, I'm going to give it to the Irish. And of course, yeah, so he actually got his message across without too much drama. And of course, you can see this in the history books, and it was done in such a smart and witty way. As well as that, he wrote a declaration, and this declaration was about what he would not do as the English had done, and that was to poison the waterways, to rape the women, and to destroy the environment. So this was very important, and we do have a park near where I live at Warrenora in Dharawal country named after him, called Burnum Sanctuary. And it's visited by a lot of people on the weekend. It's beautiful grounds, and there's walks in there as well. And the declaration is also in there for people to read. So this was a very good way to communicate and create peace and coming together. And one of his statements was, we need to walk together hand in hand in Kumpatu. And Kumpatu means the coming together of Black, white, English, First Nation, everybody coming together in unity. Then Uncle Max came onto the picture, whom you've possibly some of you met, and Catherine knows very well. And Uncle Max Harrison was a lawman, L-O-R-E man, and was a Yuin elder. And he was my partner for 24 years. And unlike Burnum, Uncle Max was not from the stolen generation, whereas Burnum, unfortunately, was from the stolen generation, which I'm going to speak about in a moment with regards to the parallels with what's happening today and what happened then. So Uncle Max wasn't from the stolen generation due to his beautiful little totem, which was the willy wagtail. So what happened was his large family saw the willy wagtail as their totem sign. So every time the little willy wagtail appeared, the mum would pick up the family and move, because the willy wagtail would tell them that the authorities were coming. You know, the Aboriginal Protection Board, if you were milky in colour, you were stolen and taken away. So they were on the move constantly. So, you know, totems, that's another thing to talk about on another day. Uncle Max wrote a book called My People's Dreaming, and it was based on one of his beautiful sacred sites, which is called Gulaga Mountain. I'm not sure if anyone's visited Gulaga Mountain, but he took many people up there, many tours, and it was a beautiful lesson in itself. You learnt and walked up. Sometimes he allowed us to walk up in silence, but again, this was connecting people to country, and it was connecting people in a healing way. And because what both Burnum and Uncle Max said was that the one thing that would connect almost all people was Mother Earth. That's one thing we all had in common. So if we were connected to Mother Earth, we were all connected. We walk the same land, we drink the same water, we breathe the same air. So if there's going to be any coming together, some people call reconciliation, which Uncle Max actually didn't like the word reconciliation, because he would say that reconciliation means that you had a relationship in the first place to reconcile, but he was saying there was no treaty and there was no relationship when the invasion happened. So he would not call it reconciliation because there wasn't a partnership in the first place. Uncle Max also has just, when he was with us in prior to 2021, he completed a book called Gurrawal the Whale. That book has now went to the publishers before Christmas. We oversaw that, oversaw the last of that, which he had asked me to do, and I just received 5 copies as a preview just in the last week. So it's very exciting. It hasn't been launched yet. And if we do have time, then we can talk about that. So Uncle Max wrote 2 books. Burnum had one as well, a book, and he was from the stolen generation, and that stolen generation would, come with the authorities, as you know, capture them. And Burnum was placed in the Kinchela Boys' Home, which was one of the most notorious for abuse, and so that was very sad. And he didn't even know his brother was also in the home because they'd been stolen. And at first he went to Kempsey. They were all in different places, and then they went to Kinchela. So some of them didn't even know what their brothers or sisters looked like. So he had a very bad time with the stolen generation. And of course, generational healing and generational effects goes from one generation to the next. So yeah, they had very different experiences, but they still were traumatized by that. Uncle Max, just concluding what he did. So that book is, was going to be available very shortly, and we will have a launch for that. Uncle Max also was instrumental in stopping the export of kangaroo meat, along with a lot of other wonderful people that had worked for years on that, and combined with Senator Pearson, who is from the Animal Justice Party. And of course, the kangaroo industry grew a lot faster than the poor kangaroos could multiply. So again, it was like, the old forests, they were being logged down faster than they could be reproduced. And unfortunately, the formula that was being used to show that the kangaroo was still in in good supply was not correct. And the big reds are actually almost endangered. So together they got, they unified, and China was going to be the next country to export the meat to. And so Uncle Max and Senator Pearson and some of the other people that did lots of good work on the kangaroos went to China, and they were at a conference table, and one of the prominent politicians or ministers there said, well, Uncle Max, why don't you want us to buy your kangaroo meat? And Uncle Max answered very humbly, like he always did. He said, well, would you like us to eat your panda bear? And they said, no, we wouldn't. And he said, well, that's the first thing, because our beautiful kangaroo is an icon for Australia. It's on our symbols. We have sporting, sporting teams named after. It's on Parliament House. It's on, on many things, and yet we treat it appallingly. And there is a video called The Love-Hate Story that many politicians were asked to come and view several years ago when this was going on about the export of meat to these countries. Not many politicians actually attended that. However, so it's a very moving video, and there's some real heroes in there that did the frontline work and showed just what was happening at the face of the kangaroo and meat industry, where there were no regulations put upon people for open shooting. Some of them were not trained in accurate shooting, so a lot of the kangaroos were maimed. They were left, in a terrible state with their joeys. They've cut out a lot that is too much to look at, but you get the idea, and how a lot of them were bludgeoned to death. And then apart from that, even the health issue, we all know Central Australia is very hot. So when they had open shooting, and sometimes it was all year round, the meat would be just hung on the back of the truck, and there's no refrigeration. So all the dust and the dirt and the E. coli would go into the meat. So when Uncle Max was there, he said, they'd already tested with the other groups of people, already tested the meat, and, E. coli was found in about 10 or 15% of the meat. So they put this forward, and thankfully China said, no, we're not going to buy your kangaroo meat. And so then, of course, a lot of the animal groups, then looked at the video, and it was a big deal in France. And so a lot of people and a lot of countries were made very aware of the atrocious treatment that we have towards animals. And, we've eaten them, we've abused them, we use them for entertainment, we use them for labour, and sadly, humans have not learned to live in harmony with animals. But anyway, that was a very big effort. And following that, Uncle Max and myself made a declaration for World Kangaroo Day. And I think you were party to the message stick ceremony, Catherine, and I think Ashley too, where, we met some of the politicians in the beautiful park there with the Tree of Wisdom, I think it's called. Is that the correct? I think it's that. And anyway, yes, and this beautiful declaration was a reminder to uphold the kangaroo and revere the kangaroo. As Uncle Max said, they were here before us, and they have every right to this country as well. And when you see the grace on that DVD, The Love-Hate Story, you'll see how beautiful it is. And Uncle Max makes quite a few statements through there that are extremely moving. Uncle Max also worked with the world architects. And people say, well, how did he and why did he want to work with architects? Well, people would build different forms of houses in different locations, and often those locations might be what they thought was a very good idea, but it might be interfering with song lines. It could be over where 2 or 3 creeks meet. So he was an advisor to the world architects with regards to when they were training their students, and many people, I witnessed many people rang Uncle Max and said something's wrong with the house. These could be spiritual things that were happening, lights coming on and off. It could be just that they felt the energy wasn't right. They felt unwell in the house, and Uncle Max would go there and, using his clapsticks and also the skills he had, would look at the geography of the land and say, well, you know, it's best not to have built here, or there might be an actual creek going right under the house that they couldn't see. It may have been a ceremonial place that they built on, because most people not being educated in this area would just think a midden or a carving may be, you know, the signs of Aboriginal presence in the past. However, it runs much deeper than that. And I was also witness to where Uncle Max said, well, the problem here is that, where did you get this sand from, for example, that you built this wall? And they'd say, oh, we went and collected it from a creek down here or somewhere else. And so materials were often brought in, whether it be rocks, sand, that may not have been the right thing to do. These people were innocent. They didn't do it on purpose, obviously, but they needed to remain where they were. So Uncle Max would point this out and have to smoke the area and ask for permission for this to occur. So consequently, a lot of people often asked Uncle Max when they brought a block of land, and including the architects and the students would all go and they would listen to his teachings on this. So that was a very important thing, I think, that is lacking in our building industry, because we just go, yes, we'll build that, and there's no connectedness to country, because those materials being used, as Uncle Max said, always come from the mother. Everything that we sit on, everything we use, everything we wear, always come from a rock and a tree. And that there's a legend about Tunki and Nadu that explains that. So nation, and so people started to actually, you know, take note of that and ask his guidance and wisdom, or he'd ask some of his Gurangi, which is some of the men that have gone through law, to come and help him so that he would pass his teachings on. But all of this was aimed at healing and connecting and not separating, working together so that we can have a more peaceful environment, land, respect, and connecting all people in unity together. So this was his aim. The last 3 years that we have gone through, which is I'm talking about since the pandemic, have really reactivated and brought out a whole series of trauma for a second time for Indigenous people. And I witnessed that myself. And what I would like to do today is draw some of those parallels about what happened in the last 3 years to what happened in their last, you know, what happened to them for 55 years. So what happened to us in the last 3 years was horrific, and especially for some people. However, for Indigenous people, they experienced this for a greater length of time. So ours sort of pales into insignificance in a way. However, this time we stood with them because some of these parallels involved us. So I've drawn up some of these parallels, and I like to mention this because a lot of people don't understand why it affected our First Nation people so badly, because these were triggers. So some of these triggers were, for example, there was a lot of tracking and tracing that we experienced, and Indigenous people also were tracked and traced. They even employed their own kind to track their own families down. We had the schools shut down, and some people were not able to go to school. The children weren't able to go to school, and right now we're experiencing some of the effects of that on especially the kindergartens and the year ones that are coming through, and I'm seeing a lot of teachers saying this. And of course, Uncle Max himself wasn't allowed to go to school, and when he did, if he spoke up, he certainly was banned from school because of his colour. We had reduced freedom of movement over the last 2 or 3 years with border closing. We weren't allowed to move within 3 or 5 kilometres of our houses. And of course, there was reduced movement. If you've seen rabbit-proof fence, they were not allowed off the missions. There were fences built. So yeah, that happened as well. And that lack of freedom of movement affected people's jobs, their ability to see their family. And this is exactly, again, what happened with the Stolen Generation and the Aboriginal Protection Board and all that went on. Now, we were forced to wear masks, and they were forced to wear clothing. So with the clothing, that forcefulness, Uncle Max and Burnum claimed that their immunity went down because even though they had some fur and some other items that helped them to keep warm, what happened was that their temperature mechanism didn't work as well because they covered up. Whereas previously they would move around, keep warm, go to warmer climates. So yes, there was forced items to be placed on the body. There was also, of course, the separation from family members, and this was on our situation. And there was, we weren't allowed to visit in nursing homes. People were locked in motels. They weren't allowed to move. And this happened also with the families when they were separated from their homelands and their families. And then, of course, we had the medical issues. So if you were Black, you weren't treated in hospital. For example, Burnum's mother, Lily Jemima McRae, she had TB, and so they refused to treat her at the time, and she died at 21. And of course, that's why he was forcefully removed at that time. And of course, we saw this happen in the last 3 or 4 years. If you didn't have your jab, your doctor would either not see you or you'd have to go out, and see them in the car. So these are all triggers. We also had they had a racial apartheid and we had a medical apartheid. So there's still apartheids. So if you weren't vaccinated, you couldn't come into this shop. So we then go into the services. And so Indigenous people were not allowed to have a drink because they were Black, or they weren't allowed to go to the movies. And if they did, they had to sit at the back of and we heard all these stories from the living proof of these people that actually went through all of this. So I'm not just making this up, like these people actually lived throughout this. They wouldn't get services. They weren't allowed to vote until very much later. So a lot of their privileges were taken away just because they were Indigenous. Of course, there were restricted jobs. If you were Black, you didn't get a job. Well, if you're vaccinated, you weren't vaccinated, you couldn't get a job. The Indigenous people had forbidden practice of language and culture. And of course, a lot of the people that wanted to practice their spirituality, their churches, that sort of thing, that was shut down again. Poisons were introduced into the body through products and procedures during the last 2 years. And those products and procedures were no different to the poisons that were introduced into the Indigenous bodies of sugar and white flour, wheat, things that were foreign to their original diet. So, there was a lot of disconnection that happened. And when you have disconnection and you have isolation, and you have a loss of security, and you have vulnerability, and with vulnerability comes fear. And the more fear you have, the worse that your mental, physical, emotional, and spiritual states are. So these are all the things that happened where there was an immense amount of trauma. And we had, during that last 2 or 3 years, lots of people ringing up. We had young Indigenous people being locked down, and there was no food. And some of them were even bribed to have the vaccine. You could get out and get your food and go hunting. And some of them were even bribed $6,000 to have their product put into their body, which I find is coercive, and it's not informed medical choice whatsoever. And we had real life situations where a young man in Kempsey had been locked down. He was desperate to get out. He was told he'd be able to go out in another 2 weeks. He waited, then said, no, you're still not ready. He got locked down again, and then he got locked down again, and then he jumped out the window and broke his foot and hobbled into the bush. And Uncle Max and I were endeavouring to find an elder to go and find him. So you can see that these traumas were really, they were a double whammy for Indigenous people, and they were fearful, they were scared, they were angry. Uncle Max said to me, not this again. I don't want to have to go through this again. So yes, the disconnection from each other, the disconnection from family and community and neighbourhood. Apart from that, there was also the disconnection, with your own body, with your senses, because of the COVID as well. We lost taste and also memories. So I've just completed a seminar, being a healthcare professional, completed a seminar with Professor Bone in the city, and he said that, people that did have long COVID, the long COVID, almost 40% of those people will get dementia if they ended up with long COVID. So there's going to be, this is if you had long COVID, not just if you had COVID, if you had long COVID. So, our health system is in trouble. We know that our education system's in trouble. We know our judicial system's in trouble. And, this needs a great overhaul. And possibly they talk about, the new reset. Well, this may be where we have to reset, in my opinion, how we do this and how we do this together, so that we can actually have good, strong foundations. And that's why Uncle Max and I were part of the Informed Medical Options Party. And the Informed Medical Options Party means that you have options. So this is what it looks like. I don't know if you can see that. Informed Medical Options Party. And this is the voting on the back.
Ah, right. Oh, yeah.
Yes. So I'm not suggesting you have to vote. I'm just saying this is what we went into, and our policies are on the back, and it's about transparency, because what we did find that, and as we're seeing now, that a lot of the information that's coming out following the products and procedures that were imposed upon people, that people are becoming very sick from them. And I see that at my clinic where I'm sitting right now, that people, after having 3 or 4 or 5 procedures, have found that they still got COVID. And we have Perrottet, who's now mentioned that it doesn't stop transmission. And we found that, the pharmaceutical complex actually lied about a lot of things, and a lot of people in goodwill took those products and procedures into their bodies to protect elderly people and to protect their family, and only to find out that that wasn't the case. So a lot of people are angry out there. And of course, teachers have been asked to come back now because a lot of the remaining teachers that were, didn't have informed medical consent. They were just told, if you don't have it, you can't work. That's not informed medical consent. So if they wanted to have that procedure, that's fine, but also the people that didn't want to have it should also have that choice. And that's what informed medical options is about, that you should have a choice about what products and procedures go into your body. And we would also like transparency about the food chain. So if there is a product that is genetically modified, you need to know about that. It should be labelled. If if a product has artificial colours and flavours, we've at least got that in there at the moment, but we need to know if other products have glyphosates in them, like the Roundup. And so what we need to have is this transparency so that people can actually make decisions about the food chain and what goes into their body. So at the moment, a lot of people don't know, and going back to the animals that we talked about before, 1080 is still used in this country. And 1080 is a horrible poison that causes a most horrific death to our dingoes. And we brought the dingoes on the message stick day outside Parliament House, just as a reminder that it's not just the kangaroos, it's other animals. And Uncle Max and I did own a dingo. And so we've looked into what's happening to the dingoes. But the 1080 is a terrible poison, and it's put down and it causes secondary poisoning. So the dingo dies this long, slow, horrible death. Nobody checks with the farmers if they put the 1080 down and it rains and it goes into our waterways. And of course, it's a neurotoxin. And if it does get into waterways and we're exposed to it, then we can end up with MS and all neurological disorders as well. So we need this great overhaul to reduce the chemical assault that's had on our environment, and we're part of the environment, and we must remember that we are part of that, and nature is our greatest teacher of all. So if we're not looking after that environment, we're not looking after ourselves or our animals that actually don't have a voice. And so one of our slogans is a voice for choice. We want to have a voice for choice, and we would like to be able to work on a local level with our councils and be quite proactive and find out what the people want in that area. So my father, who also passed away the same year as Uncle Max, he belonged to the Warrenora Valley Residents Association. And that's been functioning for many years, and we address issues in our local area, and I'm secretary of that. And I know from the local area we live in, we had 3 big issues. We've resolved one, thank goodness, but this is just to demonstrate how the connection, and we talked about connections before, how the connection between people and about connections between community and connections between local government and state government and federal government all needs to happen, because there's a great disconnection. The people up in the federal are making decisions and the state doesn't know, and then the local government hasn't got the power, and then the people are not getting what they want. So we need to have this, improved connection. So just recently, for an example, at our association meetings that we have 4 times a year, we had the issue of there's a caravan park, there's mining under Warrenora Dam, and then we had Sydney Water wanting to build in the middle of a koala wildlife corridor. So 2 communities joined together, Warrenora Heights and Warrenora Valley, where I live, joined together. We helped them. They helped us with an issue before, and we helped them because the corridor is closer to their community. And it was very interesting because this is all the red tape. We also have the mayor and our 3 E-ward councillors always attend our Warrenora Valley Association meetings. And we were informed by them at our association meeting that they couldn't do anything because it was water board land. And so then we went to our state member and he said, we can't do anything about that because it's Sydney water and Sydney. So, and we were just passed round and round and round like this. So we actually, as communities, got together. We took pictures of the koalas that were there. Our current local member for state at the moment has been in for many years and basically hasn't done very much at all. And people took photos of the koalas. So we held a big rally, we leafleted, we went door to door, we got petitions going, communities and people worked together. And we had this big meeting and we had other members of parliament because the election was coming up, which is next Saturday, but this was done last year. And so we had all different parties. I spoke, the Greens spoke, the Labor spoke. We had all different people there, and Lee Evans came and said there were no koalas in the area and he didn't have them. So everyone held up their phones with the pictures of the koalas. And all the different parties spoke and said, well, if we get in, we're going to do this, this and this. And anyway, the good news was within 2 weeks of that demonstration, the DAs were pulled and it didn't go ahead. And so this is what happens when we all work together like this. And so that was interesting, but we didn't trust that because we've had situations before where things like that have happened. And then if, you know, they're re-elected, they change their commitment and they change their promises. And this is on this local level. So our community said, well, let's make this part of National Park if we can. So that's in process now. So this is the sort of work that we would like to do if, you know, in Parliament, no matter who gets in, should be doing this. However, that connection and those connections are so important for everybody. Once you're disconnected, it will just think about it. If you're disconnected from your children or you, and you know, and how do we do this is the question. So I believe it all starts with the individual first. We have to be at peace with ourselves. We have to know our purpose. We have to start with our spiritual and our emotional and our psychological well-being. And then we then can lead and guide and act by role model and example. And then we connect our family like that. They come to us for guidance, wisdom. We connect them to other people, the right people. So then when we have our family units, then we can have community. And then the communities come together. And of course, then we can then, as I just explained, on a community level, we act together to approach the local level. And then that local level then approach the state. And then we had action. But these connections are being broken all the time. And we're not seeing, in my opinion, any proactive outcomes. You know, we're having lots of trees cut down in our area. We lose over 200 a day because of a 1050 rule. And the 1050 rule is set again by council this time. And council say that in 10 metres you can clear anything you like in your house. So if you want a view and there's a beautiful gum tree that's been there, you can just chop it down. Then 50 kilometres, you can clear shrub. And so people are doing all sorts of things, chopping trees down and, you know, the high rise. And I've got people ringing me just because I'm secretary saying, you know, there's these gum trees doing this. And thankfully, because we have our Warranor Valley Committee, I'm able to contact our local members immediately and say, this is happening. Is there a reason why this tree's being cut down? And I've got some connection. And local councils have had a lot of their powers taken away too because of corruption that happened, and they were getting backhanders. And so they've taken a lot of the powers of DAs away from councils, and it's people that like the town planners, and it's all about ticking boxes. So if they meet the right requirements, they just tick it, but they don't look at what's happening in, again, the broader community. So an example of this is what's happening with our caravan park. Our caravan park is owned by a developer, and the caravan park has been there since 1956, so it's quite historic. And a lot of people live there. Some of them have got contracts that allow them to live there. This developer wants to put in 52 two-story homes that you can't own. He owns the land, and they have a lift in them, and it's supposed to be a caravan park. And he's saying he's providing housing. And of course, people can't afford 700,000 or 800 plus. Some of them were offered $2,000 to move, 2,000 to force them out. He didn't repair the washing machines. He didn't repair the roads. And we've got a returned person from Vietnam who's in a wheelchair, and he found it very difficult just to get his wheelchair to go up and down the road. And was trying to force people out that way. So at the meeting with the mayor, we said, look, you know, there must be requirements for a caravan park owner to fulfill certain things. So if he hasn't done that, he's not a suitable owner. As soon as that was brought up, he fixed it. But by stealth, he's done one little development at a time. It'll end up looking like a detention centre. They've done a proposed view of what it'll look like. So we've got a beautiful village setting, and here's this man that wants to do this huge development as you come right into Woronora. And it was the caravan park was the first to be evacuated in our flood that we had down there, and it was a very bad flood, and it's low lying. And I asked the developer, we actually asked him to our meeting, and the mayor and the councillors invited him. This is after 4 years of this battle, and finally he came, but we had to make sure all our residents were not going to get too heated about it. So we said, look, if you're heated, we're going to have to ask him to go, and then you won't get your questions answered. So we did it like that, and I used Uncle Max's clapsticks. Thank you, Uncle Max. And anyway, it went quite well, but he was determined to still go ahead with this. He said he was the owner, he could do anything he wanted. The council's finding it difficult with the DA because that's given to the town planners. And we said, look, here's a beautiful village setting, and you're going to plonk this big development right in the middle. And it's all grey. It's not even fitting into the environment. It's right on the water. It's flooding, and people can't afford this. And some people will be just forced. And we already have a housing problem at the time. We were happy to accept a refurbishment, but not a development. And suddenly it changed to a development instead of a refurbishment. And at what point that happened, I brought that up with him, and I said, and where's your social impact statement? How it affects the community? He said, well, it's my land, Marelle. I can do anything I want with it. And I said, well, yes. I didn't say yes. I said, well, I don't believe you've done a social impact study, and this is what's going to happen to the village. And he said, well, what are you asking me? And I asked him one question. I said, I'm asking you, do you actually have a conscience? And he fumbled at that point. Anyway, but this is to show you what's been happening, and to get our country, it's failing on all systems, whether it, as I said before, education, judicial, people have lost trust in everything. They've been failed, they've been abused, their trust has been violated by what's been happening, and it's all come to the fore. So we're in a terrible state. I had people during those last 3 years, you know, have to stop their work, sell their house, move in with their parents, like all sorts of stories. I could go on and on. However, I know we need to leave time for questions. But yes, so Uncle Max was our cultural advisor for the Informed Medical Options Party, and he advised us a lot with regards to our policies, and even with the voice and the referendum that's coming up at the end of the year, with regards to what I was mentioning before about the parallels. It is my opinion that we do need them to have a voice in Parliament, because some people are very worried, even in my own party, the Informed Medical Options Party, that it will just turn to red tape and it'll be worse. And some are arguing that there's no treaty. And but I said to them, it's hard enough for us to get a voice. So imagine how much harder it is for First Nation people. This is an avenue. You can go then and argue to have a treaty. You can argue to have all these other things. You can put, this forward. I mean, we saw where all these beautiful engravings were just blown up by a mining company, 2 years ago. And then they went, oops, this was a museum and it's too late. Now, when they were asked why didn't they write, the Indigenous people, they said, we did. We've written and written and written. And you and I know if you write, you don't get anything back. So I believe that this is a very important avenue that should be available to First Nation people, even if some of them don't agree themselves, because, there's a small percentage. I know that Lydia Thorpe, she's saying, no, we shouldn't have it. And then the big, the well-established elders are saying, yes, we should, because there's a working party and you'll be able to send those people to and say, this is what we need. It's a direct voice. Now, that doesn't mean that the government will accept it, but they have to hear you. They have to at least, they have to be exposed to it. So that's my opinion. And the majority of people I've spoken with, they didn't have a voice for many years. They couldn't vote, and I think this is also an acknowledgement that that they do need a voice, and they're in a terrible state still out there with housing and drug addiction. I gave evidence at the ICE inquiry about how pathetic our system was in dealing with drug and alcohol rehabilitation. It's not open 24/7. They have to have a computer. They have to do no one owns, they haven't got reception, half of them. If they're addicted to ICE, they can't get on the computer to do a Zoom and connect. It was absolutely unworkable. The system was set up to fail. But anyway, I could go on and on about it. So I'd like to, finish off by saying that, we need a voice. Everyone needs a voice in Australia. And we'd like to be, your voice for choice, so that we can hear you. And we'd like to do that at a ground level, and we want to hear what communities have to say and to be able to take that back and to do our best with that. And I'd like to say, finish off by saying memories are actually stored in the heart. There's a book written called The Heart's Code, and it's by a doctor called Dr. Purcell, Paul Purcell, and he was a surgeon, a heart surgeon. And he said, we must know this before it's too late for humanity. And he said, because the memories are stored in the heart, it's the brain that just processes them. So if you've got the memory, that trigger, right, then it gets processed. That's why often the things we remember the most are the things we felt, whether it was sadness, grief, joy, whatever it was. The memory is stored in the heart. And so if we don't have that heart-head connection, just like we know now there's a brain-gut connection. We've all heard of the microbiome and a brain-gut connection where your gut, the bacteria in your gut, the friendly bacteria talks to your brain. So if you disturb the gut too much with many, many doses of antibiotics and different things, wrong food, it doesn't connect. Okay, so looking after your gut, 70% of your immunity is in your gut. This is why we need choice. We need both the current medical system and alternatives with herbal, homeopathic, vitamins, minerals, counselling, hypnotherapy. We need both, okay? Some people are very sensitive to drugs. And so having choice is very important, a voice for choice. So there's also this heart and brain connection too, not just the gut and the head connection. And in his book, it's very interesting. He said he noticed that the recipient of the heart took on the eye colour of the donor. So yes, isn't that amazing? So if you had blue eyes and your donor was brown, in most cases it took on the eye cut. Your eyes turned brown. They took on the allergies.
Wow.
Incredible, the allergies. And people that were, don't get any ideas with this, Catherine, but people that may have been poetic and romantic, and they were given, that was the donor, and the recipient wasn't, they started writing poetry and they became very romantic. And so watch out, Ashley.
I'm watching.
But yeah, so it was very interesting. And there's one part where he says that a young man was the recipient of a girl that had been murdered. And he had dreams so vivid that he described the murderer, and he was subsequently arrested.
Wow.
So that might not happen in every case, but very interesting. So where did all the pandemic affect? Our heart. No wonder we might have dementia coming, right? So whatever products we put in or procedures, we have to be very, very careful that it doesn't affect our heart, because it's going to affect the memory. And then we have a disconnect. Again, another disconnect. And then something else is broken. So we've got to put this whole back together again. It starts with the self. So, so to look after humanity, we have to look after ourselves, and we need to keep connection. We need to keep connection to country, to each other, by communication. And so, yeah, so I would like to finish off by saying that a quote from my dad. He said that a community united can never be defeated. And that's how we won many, many battles down at Warranora, and many people enjoy that environment today. So thank you for listening.
Hey, well done.
My goodness, Marelle, that was absolutely amazing. Thank you very, very much. I'm just going to stop the recording at the moment.